Welcome to this bite-sized, memorable look at the world around us. I'm Jim from Nature's Work. This window on nature is taking a closer look at some of the clues we see in nature that can help us understand what is going on with the geology, water, and also human impacts on the landscape. It's the lost art of reading nature's signs, a natural navigation which could also be a fun way of making maps. Plants are nature's guide to different habitats and environmental conditions. They all have specific ecological requirements which can help us to unravel the changes by following their signals. Using basic observational skills, we can develop our awareness of these signals, which will not only help us from getting lost and losing our bearings, but to knowing when we're getting close to where people live and also keeping our feet dry on a walk in the great outdoors. A great place to start is by looking at trees. What do you notice about this hornbeam? Firstly, we could look for how the tree's growth is influenced by the sun. Trees are never symmetrical and tend to be heavier on one side. In northern parts of the world, like in the UK, the sun arcs across the southern part of the sky from east to west. Trees, like all green plants, need the sun to survive and thrive, and so they reflect the sun's path in the way they grow. The side that gets the most sun, the southern side in the UK, will grow more densely and appear heavier than the side that's shaded by the tree's own leaves. The effect is easiest to spot on isolated trees, especially deciduous ones like the birch pictured here and this wonderful oak tree. The sun also shapes individual branches, and the branches on the southern side tend to grow more horizontal out towards the sun. You can see the red arrow there, whereas on the shaded northern branches, they tend to grow more vertical in the search for more sunlight. And that tends or lends itself to this feature we know as the tick effect. Leaves also reflect the amount of sunlight or shade. In the shade, leaves tend to be larger and darker as they fight and compete for the light, whereas on sunnier branches, the leaves tend to be smaller, as demonstrated with these photos of ash leaves taken from the same tree in summer. Trees are also really useful for giving us a sense of direction. Solitary trees in exposed places have a pronounced effect, as seen here in this rowan tree or a mountain ash tree. Exposed trees are often combed by the prevailing wind, and the wind can blow from any direction, but there are trends. And it's the trends that are useful for kind of natural navigation. In the UK, the prevailing wind comes from the southwest, which means that the tops of exposed trees often show a combing from the southwest to the northeast. But it's not only the shape of the tree, but it's the shape of its roots. If you take this image of a mature ash tree, the prevailing weather is from the right, which is in the southwest, and the roots are much larger and more substantial there, and they help to guide the tree and anchor it against the force of wind, much like a guy rope helps a tent in a storm. This asymmetry is seen in the shape of the tree and its roots, but it's right through the trunk as well. And if you look at a cut tree stump and not only count the rings, but if you look at where the center of the central ring is, this diagram demonstrates the asymmetry. So very few trees actually have the center directly in the middle. On the windward side, the growth tends to be less than on the lee side. So it's another useful way of looking at where the position of the central ring is, and that can help give us a guide as well. Do moss grow on the north side of trees? It's an old fable that's been spoken about, but it doesn't always bear true. If you look at this image in the beech forest in Snowdonia, are all the trees covered to the same extent with moss? Do you see a pattern? Moss are known to prefer moist and shady places, and so they're often found in where there's moisture and there's a gradient of dampness in the air. You can see here in this image that there's a definite gradient of wet and dry, and lichens in this image appear to show a preference for that damper or moister aspect of the tree, and it reflects those conditions quite well. So the conditions we see on that tree are probably quite typical for that area. So one side is drier and there's different environmental conditions. In this image, why is the tree in the center covered in moss and the tree on the very right only got moss and other epiphytes at the bottom of the tree? So it's quite a pronounced effect, and yet they're the same species in the same environmental conditions in the same woodland, in an old ancient woodland in Dartmoor. But the differences can be quite pronounced. So there's a reason behind that. So just saying it's north or south isn't necessarily a good predictor, but it's a moisture gradient that we're looking for. Plants can tell us if the soil is dry. And one plant which loves dry and also very bright conditions is bracken. And this is a fern with significant growth, so it's a good choice for investigating the effects on the environment. It covers 1.6% of land in Britain, which doesn't sound a lot, but when you consider all the buildings put together occupy 1.4% of land in Britain, then you know it's got considerable coverage. This DV group are camping on the ground, but if they'd known about dry ground and bracken, then they would have possibly camped somewhere else. It's a good plant to see right throughout the year, and in the autumn you can see the fronds in this gorgeous golden brown colour. In the winter the leaves die back, but the rhizome in the soil pushes out new stems and fronds in the spring and can transform our hillside and neglected fields. And the next time you're out, if you check under the canopy of a tree, bracken will flourish right up to the point where the canopy shades the ground, and there's a distinct boundary. If you've been wandering across damp, boggy hillsides, then you'll probably be very familiar with this tall grass-like plant known as softrush. Softrush is a water-loving plant known as a hydrophyte, and the central tissue has a spongy pith. And this pith is not only an adaptation to allowing air spaces within the plant, as the waterlogged ground doesn't allow air spaces in outside the roots for gas exchange, but this spongy pith was gathered in olden times, bundled together and dipped in fat to make candles. We know when we're getting close to human activity by some signature plants like nettles, for instance, and they specialize. They feed off nitrates and phosphates, and so they're a good predictor of where human activity has been. So we enrich our soil through compost and human waste, but also through agriculture and livestock, adding nutrients to the soil. So when you walk in the wild and come across a clump of nettles, then if you look around, you may very well see signs of human activity close by. Another human impact is trampling, and we trample along paths. And over time, the vegetation changes on these paths due to compaction, but also the physical disturbance and pressure. So some plants like dandelion or ribwort plantain have flat leaf rosettes, making them sturdy and resistant against trampling. And they can also get below the grazing mouths of animals, but also lawn mowers. So you often find them associated with lawns. There's another plant pictured here, which is deer grass, which grows very, very differently when it's not being trampled, but under trampling on a path, you can see the distinct change in its appearance. Finally, we'll have a look at calcium-rich soil, and geology has a significant part to play on species we find growing in an area. So calcium forms the basis of limestone and chalk downs, and the vegetation are either calcium loving or calcium hating, so calcicoal or calcifuge species. One beautiful, bright, colourful calcicoal is Viper's bugloss. It's an apt name as it bears great resemblance in many ways to snakes. St. John's wort, they're notoriously calcium loving. Dropwort, sweet violets, and strawberries, only found on calcium-rich grounds. So if you'd like to know more, why not join me on one of my courses? If you prefer to guide yourself, then I have a superb range of flower cards created as playing cards and top trumps, designed to make learning fun. Please press like if you've enjoyed this presentation. Feel free to write any comments, and see you next time for more Windows on Nature.